Hello and welcome to the final video in this series. We are looking at snapshot number 9. And so let's just take a look at a few of the things that were accomplished in the last hour, hour and a half or so. First of all, one of the things that I tried to do was to organize the code to make everything very readable. And this is something that you'll want to do as you comb through your code and look for things that you don't need anymore, excess code that should have been removed from the project, or to organize the code in such a way that you're able to find things much more easily. So I'm going to select the main form in particular and select this View Code button. And you can see that I have a number of rolled up region areas defined, one for private toolstrip button events, for menu item events, then private helper methods, and then in the body that's not encapsulated within a region, I have the events for the loading of the main form, the folder combo box, the channel list box, and so on, those selections. So you can see that I tried to give some thought to the readability of my code so when I come back to it a couple of days or weeks later, I can find things that I'm looking for very easily. Also, I make it easier for other people to find code within my project. So as they begin to look through and try to maintain it or analyze it, they can find things much more easily than if I just had everything randomly, haphazardly, organized or unorganized, as the case might be. So you can see here that we've tried to give some thought to that. Now, one of the things that I also tried to do was create helper methods for the toolbar and menu events. So for example, if we take a look here at the tool strip, formerly we had a lot of the code to actually pop open the folder dialog, or we actually popped open the message box that asked, are you sure you want to delete the folder? Same thing is true for the channels whenever they clicked on the Channel Add Toolstrip button. And what I've done was removed all the code and put these into helper methods. Now, if you're new to programming in Visual Studio, or Visual Studio IDE rather, what you can do to find this helper method is to just select it by double-clicking the word, then right-clicking and select Go to Definition. This will take you to the part of code where that particular method is stored. So you can see here that this add channel private helper method is in a section that's been expanded because we went to it. It was in a region called private helper methods. Okay, so the reason that I did that is twofold. First off, in my opinion, it looks aesthetically pleasing from a code cleanliness perspective. And then, more importantly, though, if we were to add menu items in the future, that also allowed us to add a folder or edit a folder, delete a folder, whatever the case might be. All we need to do is call that helper method. We don't have to re-implement that same code. There's an old adage that is you should never write the same code twice. So knowing that at some point in the future, in future iterations of our application, we may want to add menu items or other shortcuts to add, edit, and delete folders and so on, it would be more helpful now to organize that code into its own helper method. So that's the idea behind that. The next thing that I was able to accomplish in snapshot number 9 was implement a strategy for fortifying my code. And we learned in lesson number 11 about declarative exception handling with the try-catch statement. And I try to be pretty consistent about how I implemented this throughout my code. So as an example, let's take a look at the code that allows you to add a new folder. So the easiest way to find this would be to go to the add folder and right click and select go to definition again, as we just talked about. And okay, here we go. As you can see, I added a try catch statement around the code that allows us to receive the information from the folder dialog and then create a new row in our data set and then save that row back in the underlying data source. Okay. And so as you can see in lines 107 through 121, they're enclosed with try catch statements. And while I enclosed quite a few lines of code, there are only 2 or 3 spots that I'm just ever so slightly worried about. The first one would be in line 110, where you see folder.folder name equal myfolderdialog.folder name. Uh, there's the potential that somebody typed in too many characters or typed in illegal characters there, so that could potentially throw an exception. Probably more likely is lines 112, where we're adding a new folder row. Uh, Something could happen to the XSD or to the database. The definition could have changed out from under us, so we need to check for that. How could it have changed out from under us? Well, if the user had gone and tinkered around with the XSD or with the .mdf file, who knows? Anything could potentially happen there. And then for the same reasons, line number 115, where we call the update. Again, what could possibly go wrong there? Well, the database might have a lock on it, or it might have been deleted by the user, or the user may have deleted the table. Any possible number of problems could have happened. And so you can see here when that occurs, something as dramatic or as grave as one of the problems that I just described, we'll want to pop open a message box to alert the user to the fact that there was a problem creating a new folder. Now, this is in opposition to my typical approach, which is a very non-invasive sort of notification. And you can see an example of that uh, whenever the user uh, in line 104, if he were to select anything but the OK button. So if he selected cancel, what we'll do is in the status label, and if you recall, we'll go back here just briefly and show you the status label. You can't see it, but it is to the right of this status bar. So we'll print out little text messages in the remainder of this bar to let the user know what's going on. But the approach I take there is that to say, okay, I acknowledge the fact that the new folder operation was canceled in line 128. So that's an example where we are taking charge of the exception right here in the main form.vb and displaying message boxes and so on. However, if we were to take a look at the RSS Manager, there's another example of how I implemented the declarative exception handling. And as you can see, I pretty much wrapped it around everything within the process newsfeed method. And the reason that I did that is that whenever we're dealing with the internet, there's lots and lots and lots of potential problems that could occur. The network cable could be disconnected. The resource at the other end might not be in XML, or the file might be corrupt, or just a number of potential different problems. So we want to maybe take a little bit more broad-based approach to our try catching. So you can see I just wrapped pretty much the entire method from lines, let's say line number 68 all the way to the bottom line number 123 in a try catch. Now, what is different about this than the previous example that we looked at is that instead of handling the exception in line 125 through 127, in line 126, we're actually taking whatever exception was raised and we're going to just throw it up to whatever code called our process newsfeed method. And the reason is because it's a little bit of a code separation issue. If I really want this to be a class that's usable in other projects, this class should have no knowledge of how to display anything on the screen. So that's why I didn't want to include a messagebox.show or a reference to a label or anything like that. We're going to pass this back to the code that called it and let it know that there was a problem, and if it wants to display it, then it can take the steps to do so. So we got to think in terms of the responsibilities that we're delegating to each of the methods and the classes that are within our application, and think who should have the responsibility of displaying messages to the screen. In my opinion, this RSS Manager class, based on the way that we've defined it and what we want to accomplish with it, it should not have that knowledge. So let's take a look at a section of code that actually calls our process newsfeed. So we're going to go back to our main form.vb, and we're going to look at, let's see here. We'll just try this instead. I believe refresh news items. Whoops, nope. Sorry, just bear with me here for a moment. query channels. Okay, this is exactly where we want to go. Okay, so you can see in this case, query channels, we've already covered this once or twice uh, for various reasons. However, as you can see, as we are going to loop through each channel that's returned uh, from our process news feeds, or rather, we're going to go through each channel that is currently within our set of channels from the data set. For each channel, we're going to call process newsfeed in line 429. And what we'll receive back is a series of news item objects, custom objects that are within that rssmanager.vb file. Okay, so at the very end of this try-catch statement, we are also throwing the exception from here. So we've decided to not delegate the responsibility of notification to query channels, but rather whatever calls query channels. So we may have to go to, let's see, the refresh RSS toolstrip button, click event. Okay, so you can see here that this is the code that actually calls query channels, which in turn will call process news feeds. And if an exception is thrown while calling query channels for any of the reasons that we mentioned before, whether the exception happened in the RSS manager or within the query channels method that calls it, then we're going to simply pop open a message box that says there was a problem updating the RSS feeds, and we're even going to display a message. Now this is really a judgment call. Is it necessary to interrupt the user's workflow with this message? Could we have just as easily printed it out to the status label at the very bottom of the application? Well, that might be too subtle. If we're experiencing problems, we may want to let the user know that we could not retrieve any new items, instead of leaving them with the possible impression that there was no new news. And so that's really a design decision. You'll get feedback from your users. Some will say they like the non-invasive, non-obtrusive approach. Others will say that they absolutely hate it, and uh, so you'll pretty much have to make your decision based on that, and then live with the consequences as a result. So this was an example of throwing the exception up the chain and allowing somebody to handle it. So you may want to set some a break point in line 45 of the main form.vb, and then step through the application just to see how this works, and even unplug your network cable as you're walking through this code as a way of just seeing this in action. The next thing that I wanted to point out was the use of the rows effect. And by that, we're going to go back to our code to add a folder. So we're going to right click and select go to definition. And you can see here that we have in lines 114 through lines 121 this code that attempts to determine whether or not the update of the data set back into the original data source using the folder table adapter was successful or not. And we do that using an integer that we define called rows affected. If rows affected is greater than 0 in line 117, then that means we were successful. One row should be affected whenever you're adding a new row to the database. It should be one row. So what we'll do is then in our status label, again, a non-obtrusive way, non-invasive way of dealing with the user to give them some feedback. So in line 118, we're going to tell them that the new folder was created, myfolderdialog.folder name. Otherwise, there was a problem creating the new folder, could not save into the database. Again, this was just a decision. Maybe this is too subtle. Maybe this warrants a message box pop-up saying there was a problem creating the new folder. That will be a decision that I'll have to live with, and my users will either like or dislike because of their particular disposition. So every design decision comes with consequences. We may have to rethink this if too many people are confused and never understand why their folder doesn't show up in the list. Those are the kinds of things that you have to think through and come up with a strategy, and maybe your thoughts on this are different than mine. Maybe mine will mature after some people use the application. But at any rate, you can see that this particular approach is used whenever we're dealing with the database. Whenever we're calling the update method in particular, we're going to determine how many rows were affected and then give the user some feedback based on that. Okay, the final thing that I wanted to demonstrate is the implementation of this expand label. So whenever the user clicks the expand label, let's go ahead and run this application briefly. And if we hit the refresh RSS, and we can see in our little preview area here that we get a web page. Maybe we want to blow this up so that we can view it in Internet Explorer. So I'm going to click the expand button, and you can see that Internet Explorer pops open with the proper hyperlink to .NET Rocks in this particular case. Okay, so how do we get this to work? Well, I think I alluded to this earlier in our discussion that instead of using a hyperlink control, I actually wanted to capture the event of the click so that I could pop open Internet Explorer. And the hyperlink control in the toolbox didn't give me really that ability, so I had to abandon this link label rather. Okay. Instead, I used a regular label control and I changed its visible properties to the text color blue and added an underline. Okay. And so then in the click event, what I did was in line 581 called system.diagnostics.process.start. So we're going to start a new process. The process name is iExplore. That is the process name for Internet Explorer. And then we're going to pass in the URL that we want Internet Explorer to open to by default. Okay, so let's explain this. This expand label is obviously our little label, but we're looking at the tag property. Let's go back here to our design view, and let's look at the properties for our label. And if you see here, we've got the tag property bound to the news item binding source link field. So this will basically take whatever hyperlink is available for our the currently selected news item, and we'll bind it to the tag field. The tag field is simply a storage area where we can put anything we want to put. It is just metadata, extra storage for some value that never gets displayed, but it's held on to by a particular control. And most controls have this tag property. In this particular case, we wanted to data bind it so we didn't have to write any extra code to retrieve the value from the data set, the underlying data set, data row for this particular selected news item. And so we'll reference it, first of all, by making sure that there's something in there. If there's not, the length of the tag is 0, then we'll return. We won't pop open Internet Explorer. Perhaps we should have sent a message to the user that says that operation couldn't be performed for whatever reason. Okay, but decided not to do that. So in line 581 that we were reviewing just a moment ago, you can see that we called on the expand label.tag property, and what will this return to us? It should be the hyperlink. And if there's a problem, we'll pop it open in a message box. Okay, and one other feature I just wanted to demonstrate here is I'm going to click the refresh RSS button, and did you notice the little progress bar that populated? Now, admittedly, it happened so fast because I got a fast internet connection that you may have missed it. However, the progress bar um, ticked across very quickly to let me know that the application was currently busy grabbing down the RSS feeds. And notice also that I get this RSS feeds updated successfully, 100 news items were added. So I get some great feedback here in my status label. Okay, now the next steps. You'll notice a dearth of 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 um, of code comments in certain areas. So this is probably the time that I would take to comb through my code and make sure that everything looks good. And I would look for areas where I could improve it by naming things a little bit better, spacing things out a little bit better to make it more readable. I would try to make things consistent in terms of naming conventions, add as much helpful hints with the code comments as possible. And so I really just want to clean up my code and make it look good. I may also want to look at any to-do items that I haven't been able to figure out up to this point. And there's one easy way to do this. Let's see if I can get this working. Um, if I go to the error list and let's see if we can get this to work. I'm sorry, it's actually not the error list that we want to look at. We want to look at the task list. Let's go ahead and get rid of errors. And notice that whenever I select comments, that any to-do items that I listed with the word, with the moniker to do, that those come up in my task list. So I could jump here to implement help tool and I could see, oh yeah, I forgot I was supposed to implement the help tool. Or I can go and look at things that aren't working quite the way I thought they were and try to fix those problems in my code. So using to-do comments in conjunction with the task list, pulling down, selecting comments from the type of task that you want to display is extremely helpful whenever you're developing an application, because you're often going to want to remind yourself that, oh, I wanted to do this, I just can't find the time to do it now, I'll have to worry about it later. Okay, so make use of that as you're developing your applications. Now at this point, we're going to want to test our application out, and there's a number of different ways to test an application. One of the things you're going to want to do is test the things that are most likely able to break and see how your application responds. So, for example, you may want to start the application, try to delete the database, and then see what error message you get. You know, start the application, start typing data in fields and put all kinds of weird, strange characters and type as much as you can into the fields. Click the buttons in rapid succession or out of the typical order that you would normally use the application. Letting other people try to bang on the application and try to break it. Those are all good ways to test your application. Turning off your internet connection right in the middle of a collection of the RSS data. That would be a good test, just to see how your application responds. You don't want it to do anything that is unpredictable. You want to be able to, in confidence, give this application to other people so that, you know, if they do experience problems, it looks like at least you've given it some thought that this could happen, and here's the way that you remedy the problem. So test, test, test as much as you possibly can. Employ your friends and other coworkers to test the application as well. And then at some point you're going to want to distribute this to other people. So let's talk about how to create a installer program for your new application. So what you'll want to do is take a look at the Solution Explorer, right-click and select Properties, and this will allow us to view the property tabs for our application. Now we can change things like the name of the assembly and also the icon. We can choose a default icon so that when it is installed that you know, it looks a little more attractive than just some empty white window. That would probably be the first place where you want to start. Also then, you'll want to set up the publishing information for your application. Visual Basic 2005 Express Edition, as well as all the new Visual Studio tools, contain a feature called Click Once, which allows you to easily de deploy and redeploy your application each time you make changes to it. So you have some choices to make of where you want to publish your application. You can publish to, for example, a website, and the click once functionality is pretty neat in so much that it will upload your application to the website. It'll create a new page that will describe, you know, give a download location. It'll provide some versioning information and things of that nature. Uh, so that's all things that we can do straight from this little tab. Now, for our purposes, I just want to publish to our local our local system. So I'm going to just select something very easy, like we'll just publish to the desktop. In our case, I want to make sure the application is available offline as well as online, so it'll be launchable from the Start menu. The other choice is to make it available only when somebody browses to a particular web page. And the benefit there is that they would always have the most updated version of the application. So if you were to make fixes and everything, they would always be brought down for your end user. You wouldn't have to worry about telling them, well, you need the latest version. You can also set some publishing version. By default, it's going to start off with version 1.0.0.0. However, we can, every time we make a build and do a publish, you can see that we've clicked this automatically increment the version with the revision with each publish. Some of these buttons can help us define the application files and things that are external to our application, maybe icons or text files or help files or any other additional files that are needed to be deployed with our application. Any prerequisites, existing software that has to be in place before the application can be installed successfully, and so on. For our purposes, we're going to make this very simple and just click on the Publishing Wizard. This asks where do you want to publish this application. We've already set the desktop as the destination. We're going to click the Next button. It asks where will the users install the application from. And for our purposes, we're just going to either select a UNC path or file share or from a CD-ROM or DVD-ROM. I'm just going to go ahead and select a location where our users are going to install from. We'll just go ahead and put this directly from the C:/, but we perhaps would want a better place than that in the future. So it asks for a UNC path, so we'll have to give it a different location. I think instead I'm just going to select from a CD-ROM or DVD-ROM and click the Next button. Will the application check on its own for updates, or will it not? We're just going to, for the time being, select the application will not check for updates. Click the Next button and then finally click Finish. And now Visual Basic 2005 is going through the process of creating a setup application and the folders that are necessary in order for it to be installed. So we could copy these to a CD and burn it. So we would need these files in order for this to work. But for the time being, what I'm going to do is just go here to my desktop. I'm going to double click setup.exe and see what it does for me. It gives me a security warning. We can refine this setup process, specifically the security warning, through the use of a key that we might associate with our application, so that users can be confident that the application came from our company or from us, as opposed to somebody who's trying to hack their system by creating a malicious application. But as you can see now, our application has been installed on the end user's computer and it's currently working. And we can change this install script in a number of different ways by going back through the Publish Wizard and also changing some of the options on this publishing page. So again, if we wanted to deploy this to some of our friends, we need to take some of these files. So let's just isolate some of these. We're going to take these files and place them into a folder where we're going to burn, maybe using Nero or the Windows XP software in order to burn a new CD. It already comes with an autorun.inf file, so as the user inserts the CD into their CD on their machine, it'll automatically pop open the setup routine. Okay, so we have come to the end of our 16 lesson series on learning Visual Basic 2005. Using the new Express Edition tools, I hope you've gained a better appreciation and understanding of these tools and how you can use them to build real-world applications. And as we've just seen, how to deploy those applications on your users' computers. So on a personal note, I hope you've enjoyed this rather lengthy journey that we've had together from the point where we explained how to install Visual Basic 2005 Express Edition, to the point now where you're developing some pretty serious applications. If you enjoyed this series of videos, please visit www.learnvisualstudio.net, where we have a number of videos that can take you from this point and help build your skill set even more. I wish you great success in your application development efforts. Good luck.